Portfolio Composer, episode 181.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
You have to pay yourself, because if you don't pay yourself and you are on the verge of losing your home and your well-being, you're not going to be in a position to generate more gigs for more money. And there's a big section, it's not even a thin line, there's a huge transition between giving your musicians a compensation that's respectful of the amount of work they did and how much you appreciate them bringing your dreams to life, and paying yourself what you need to continue as a business.
This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. Dorico is the music scoring software of the 21st century, allowing you to write, publish, and play back music notation to the highest professional standards. Created by the world's foremost experts, Dorico marries art, engineering, and AI, resulting in scores of unparalleled balance, warmth, and beauty. Visit dorico.com/TPC to download a fully functioning 30-day trial version of the software. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope, and I'm very grateful that you're taking the time to listen to this podcast. I say it every week, but I really do believe it, that if you are a creative of any type, and I'm speaking here to composers specifically, that means you're a business owner. And there are a lot of lessons we can learn from the business world, marketing, PR, networking, branding, finances, and apply that to how we make art without diminishing our art, so that we can go out in the world and say the things that need to be said, but also keep the lights on in our house, so to speak. And so this episode is really exciting because I'm speaking with a composer who branches a variety of styles and is experiencing some tremendous success in her life. And I'm very proud to introduce you to Tamar-kali. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Brooklyn-born and bred artist Tamar-kali is a second-generation musician with roots in the coastal sea islands of South Carolina. As a performing and recording artist, she has defied boundaries to craft her own unique and alternative sound. 2017 marked her debut as a film score composer. Her expressive and varied score swells around dramatic widescreen views of the Mississippi Delta, said Variety magazine. In Dee Rees Mudbound, a Netflix feature wowing film festival audiences and generating Oscar buzz. That's tremendous. So first, congratulations on all of that success.
Thank you so much.
I would love to start today by getting a sense of more of who you are and how you came here. So I know that you have a rock background. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I was in a documentary a little while ago about Black kids in the punk rock and hardcore scene called Afropunk. And essentially my trajectory to this moment starts at home. My dad was a musician, so I'm a second generation musician. He was a bass player. He pretty much retired by the time I was a toddler, but my first lessons in music were through him. In my teens, I was very much drawn to alt rock, new wave, eventually punk rock and hardcore. And I feel like that balanced out that aspect for me in terms of like music. And I ended up trying to escape music, and I went to college for English education. But by the second semester, I was going to coffee houses, and then ended up fronting a post-hardcore band, and then eventually crafting a life as a solo artist.
Okay, so I giggled a little bit when you said you tried to escape music, because I tried to escape the idea of teaching and I couldn't get away from it. So I love how this was a powerful pull for you and it moved you ever more and more towards this. And you're in New York and you're kind of doing the club thing and you have your band with strings. I mean, you're doing a little bit of everything all the time.
I mean, that's what it means to be an artist. It's so deep because it's like, I know that for myself, when I got to a point where I was supporting myself with my, work, come hell or high water, skin of the teeth, not glamorous, especially as an independent artist, I definitely got to a point where I lost a lot of the joy of creating because I was wearing so many hats, fiscally sponsoring my own tours, admin, it's like one thing when you're just playing together with people and you're jamming and you're in a band and you have a collaboration. But when you make that shift to being a solo artist where you're employing musicians to play your compositions or, it can get really intense because you have to be this professional person, this boss, this leader. And more of a leader than a boss, because bosses tell people what to do, but leaders show people what to do. So there's just so much more involved in being able to be a good leader. And in order to have a successful career, I believe, as an independent solo artist, you have to be a great leader. And mind you, I'm still in the process. It's been wonderful being a part of this film team, and it's another level of visibility, but I'm still like hardcore working musician making my way. So in order to survive, I've had to use my versatility, but it's not a curse, being in a very specific genre scene like punk rock or hardcore. I know initially when I first started being more broad with my expression, it was met with a little bit of pushback, but at the end of the day, I'm not defined by a single genre. I'm an artist. I'm a vocalist and a composer. And I think that my alchemy as an artist is first level priority, maintaining my integrity and my authenticity as a creative person, and then managing all the responsibilities that come with doing that professionally.
I love how you put that, maintaining your creativity as your first priority. But balancing that with, like you said, with the second part, which are all the different hats that you just described wearing. What were some of the hard-earned lessons that you got from that you wish someone had kind of explained to you as you were starting? Like, you're going to have to do this. This is what you need to know.
Well, someone did explain to me a little later, but I feel like, so the money part, right?
Yeah.
People about such a tricky thing. So this is very important, and people don't always tell folks this. You have to pay yourself, because if you don't pay yourself and you are on the verge of losing your home and your well-being, you're not going to be in a position to generate more gigs for more money. And there's a big section, it's not even a thin line, there's a huge transition between giving your musicians a compensation that's respectful of the amount of work they did and how much you appreciate them bringing your dreams to life, and paying yourself what you need to continue as a business. Initially, I used to just pay too much. And I know this sounds like crazy, because I've done session work. I've worked for other bands, but it's like, I don't want someone who's hiring me, I don't want all their money or to pay me to the point where we can't do more gigs together. And I feel like individual artists, sometimes they don't understand that you need some type of plan in terms of a setup, percentages, like what percentage of your performance fee is going to go into your costs. And your costs not only include what you're paying the musicians, but your rehearsal time, your prep time, the travel, you know what I mean? It's just like having that business brain early on, as opposed to thinking, I'm going to get $500 and I have 4 musicians, so we'll get 100 piece. You basically just paid out your pocket to play. And, especially when you come from genres where you're like used to collaborating in a band context with, people, you can't still think about it like you're 13 years old jamming in your basement. It's just not, it's not sustainable.
I love that. And you know what? One of the things that I read a lot in these kind of business books and financial books is that idea of paying yourself first. And I think that there's probably a lot of pushback in the new music and composition communities because there is this kind of anti-capitalist mindset that says money's bad. But the idea here is to make sure that you are still making your living, but you're not stealing from anyone else, right? I hear you saying, I need to make sure that I can go home and keep things alive and paying other people for the work they've done.
Because if you can't go home and keep things alive, then you can't gig.
You can't gig.
That's
right. And so do you take a certain percentage right off the top that as you're kind of budgeting and you're trying to plan things out? Do you say 5%, 10% of whatever to pay yourself? How do you figure that out?
I'm still very small fry, small potatoes type of work. So I think about it, it's a higher percentage than that. Like to me, 5-10% would be more like an administrative fee if you had somebody helping you out to organize all the particulars around the gig. I think that the biggest thing that you need to understand is that the cost of, let's see, when I talk about rehearsal, the pay, like you need to just pretty much think about what your costs are. I think that's important. People don't think about costs. You need to think about cost, how much you want to pay the musicians, how much rehearsal space is going to cost, if there's anything else you need to get, equipment, clothing, whatever, you know what I mean? And you kind of have to approach each gig or job from that perspective. What are the items, like itemize all the things that are necessary to make it happen and make sure that that is included. Say you want to split it down the middle, that you're going to take home half of the fee and the rest is going to include everything else that it takes. And if you feel like splitting it in half is not going to allow you to pay the musicians a decent wage or a legitimate wage, then you need to scale down. Like it needs to be that, do you know what I mean? Like coming from this different perspective, then maybe I need to do this gig solo, or maybe I need to do it with just one accompanist. Like that type of thinking I wish I had early on. It would have made a huge difference in the depths and the levels that I sometimes had to exist at while getting paid for performing.
I think that's great advice. That's a lesson that has taken me a long time to learn too. So I'm glad you brought that up. You're now transitioning into film work. How did that come about?
Well, it started with, this is the third feature film that I've worked with this director on, Dee Rees. It started, I guess, like about 7 years ago, I think her first feature came out, Pariah. She was looking for diegetic music for the film. And her cinematographer at the time, Bradford Young, he was familiar with my work because he was a friend of the director that shot that documentary I was in. And so he suggested that she might want to check out some of my work. And she did. And so production reached out to me about wanting to lend songs to the soundtrack. And I was like, okay, can I see the film? She had a short that she had produced first, and she was in the process of filming the feature. And that's always scary because over time, every once in a while, someone would ask me to collaborate with them on a film thing. And it was terrifying because, to be honest, I didn't have great expectations at all. But I saw the short and it was amazing. And I was like, whatever you need, it's all good. Yeah. I'm so excited. And then she ended up getting really into the stuff. And she was like, I would love for you to do a cameo in the film and perform within the film, in addition to lending us songs for the soundtrack. And I was like, cool, awesome experience, just wonderful. Really believe in her vision, her ability as a director. So from there, she started learning more about my work. The songs I lent to Pariah were just the straight ahead, aggressive melodic rock stuff that I do with my 5-piece band. Then through coming to more of my shows, she found out about my string and voice sextet, Psycho Chamber Ensemble. She also saw me do a historical New Year's Eve show where I did like vintage blues and then juke joint blues. And she then told me, I'm about to direct a feature film for HBO. It's a Bessie Smith biopic. And I would love for you to score it.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, whatever you want, like pretty much I just told her, she knows she has carte blanche with me. It's like anything she's doing, whatever you need, sis, whenever, wherever, I got your back. Like that's how I feel about her work. So I went up for the job. HBO has a very specific way that they work and, a team that they rely on. And as an untried, unheard film composer, I did not get to the job, to say the least. But I did sing on the soundtrack. And that experience informed Dee about how she might want to approach negotiating in the future. She wanted to have final say on the composer. And that's what happened. And so when Mudbound came along, she locked me in.
Oh, nice. And Netflix produced that.
So it was an independent film that premiered at Sundance 2017. And after that premiere, like a week later maybe, Netflix picked it up as a distributor.
Okay.
As Dee Rees.
Yeah, your publicist sent me the link, and I was listening to it, and I was completely floored. The music is stark and powerful, and it reminded me a lot of the Shawshank Redemption music, but with
are you kidding me?
Yeah, with a
Ooh,
sense of there's a raw power that Shawshank doesn't have, because Thomas Newman also writes this kind of modal stuff that makes it otherworldly. But I was completely drawn into the sound world you created. Yeah, it was wonderful. And I was actually just listening to the thing on Spotify before we got on this call. So it's great music. But it seems like...
Thank you. I mean...
Oh, go ahead.
No. I want to hear what you say.
Oh, well, this is a theme that comes up a lot in the podcast as I'm speaking, especially with film composers, that it really starts with the relationship. And a lot of composers want to get into composing for media, and they think that they can just show up in LA or in New York and kind of hang their shingle. But it's really about you building a friendship and a collaborative partnership with the directors and producers. And that's what happened with Dee Rees.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm of this, it's like, I'm not like in my 20s or what have you. I've been around for a little bit, and I feel like, and let me not be ageist like that, because there are artists of every distinction and age who kind of have a love for this sense of bohemia, where basically you are working across disciplines with other artists who share your philosophy or ideology, and the ultimate goal is to be able to create new provocative work with your colleagues across disciplines. And that's always been something that I aim to do. I think about Frida Kahlo hanging out with Josephine Baker and Trotsky, and that's some cool shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm just, I was like, if I could just be a fly on the wall. So I've been inspired by different disciplines, and so having the opportunity to collaborate across disciplines, that's a sweet spot for me as an artist. It's like what dreams are made of in terms of how I would like to see myself in the long term as an artist. So it's interesting. I guess, like I said, we do have, maybe it's because I didn't go through a music school and I just kind of like hit the practice before the theory, just in life, being a second generation musician as well. That it never even occurred to me to try to get into a certain type of industry. Like, I've been out here by hell or high water, making mistakes, just being an artist, and, being able to collaborate with someone whose work I really respect. So I'm grateful of having come in through that door. It speaks very much to just how I function as a human being, the type of learner I am, and the type of artist that I am. So, everybody's got a different way that they roll. For me, this organic style is pretty much how I've been functioning for pretty much my entire life. So it would make sense that I would fall into it in this way.
This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorico users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorico to make their careers happen.
My name is Reginald Unterzehr. I am a composer, conductor, voice teacher, musician of a variety of sorts. It does absolutely everything I need. Plus, every time a new feature is released, it does it with depth and clarity that I have never seen in any programs to date. Right now, I think my favorite, I'm just finally figuring out the idea of flows. I'm deep into a multi-movement choral orchestral soloist project. And so there are certain aspects of that I had not explored at all and didn't really need. And now that I see how they work, it's going to be a tremendous help when I get into the rehearsal and distribution of scores phase and revisions phase. It just makes the way that flows are set up makes it a single document that works for all the different movements of it, and I'm loving that. The number one benefit is the fact that I believe this program has legs, that there's going to be updates that come out regularly. The team that runs it is a reliable, solid team. The people who own it are responsible and have a commitment to the musical community. This was my big problem with platform that I left. It was like, this platform has been abandoned and I do not want to spend another cent on it. I definitely recommend Dorico. My number one thing is that it actually presents a path forward as my work continues. I am 62 years old. Learning a new program is daunting. I really like the way that the scores look. They just seem very natural. The spacings work so much better. The way that choral scores work now, the way that it works with lyrics, the way that it works with layouts. I went back to I was with the choir doing a piece that I had put together in another program 8-10 years ago. And they were asking me all kinds of questions about, what is this note and what is that? Is that a tie? Is that a slur? Is that a this thing? And I was looking back at it and I was going, oh, yeah, they really fixed that problem, didn't they? Because I don't get those questions with Dorico. People look at the notes and they play the notes or sing the notes and it makes sense. They don't have to figure out what the program meant by it. I run into problems in rehearsals oftentimes when tracking the eye across the page confuses them rhythmically. And I have not had that problem at all with Dorico. Again, it seems to be, it gets out of the way of the interface between composers' intentions and musicians' reading. Rather than introducing barriers, it removes barriers. And I like that a lot.
The kind folks at Dorico have set up a special web page so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorico. So go and do that. I have been using the program and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to dorico.com/TPC. This is a question I like to ask people who are on the show. But if you could give 3 business tips for those people who are listening, things that they can take action on today that'll start moving them forward. And you've probably already provided the first one, which is pay yourself. But what are some of the others?
It's deep because what I have learned in going through that cycle of just playing with your friends and playing for fun, then playing professionally and losing your mojo and feeling like, what the hell am I doing? And where I am today, I have this mantra, and it's the work is the way.
The work is the way.
The work is the way. You have to be creating. You have to be creating. And of course, there's a part of me, there's a little nun inside of a little Jesuit nun inside of myself that wants to wrap myself across the knuckles for not having more discipline in terms of my practice of my different crafts. But at the core of it, whenever I am being an artist, whenever I'm being creative, whenever I am composing, whenever I'm playing, I am in such a joyful, wonderful space that the law of attraction comes into play. And I'm able to draw the things that I want to myself. So I think it's very important, even when you're wearing these different hats and you're learning about how to deal with yourself as a business, essentially. That's my overall philosophy on it. In terms of tips, another tip I would say.
Can I ask you a clarifying question before you go on?
Sure.
So it seems like once you get yourself into the creative flow, then you feel that you can begin to use the idea of the law of attraction. But if you're not in that space, it's more difficult.
Mm-hmm. I found so. I don't know about other people's paths, but when I transitioned into doing music professionally, and I got so caught up, and also because the learning curve, there's just mathematically, if you're taking on a lot of hats, like you're multitasking, but you're not necessarily multitasking well, you're doing what needs to be done otherwise for you to function if you don't have other options. But that's why it's so important to really set aside the time or just the understanding of knowing how important it is for you to be creating, because you are going to get caught up. Yeah. You don't have, if you're self-managed, and it gets to a point where you're so busy trying to get gigs that you're not writing songs. And that's like the beginning of the end.
Right.
So I think understanding what it is to be an artist, and when I have the ability to look back in retrospect of who I've been when I first started, how I engaged people, just the nature of being an artist it's a self-driven kind of thing. So you can be incredibly self-absorbed, and there's a certain amount of self-absorption, whether you want to call it focus or whatever, that's required in order to like make your dreams come true. You just want to make sure that you're not allowing that process of, like when you're creative and you want to hunker down and you really get internal, you want to make sure that you're not allowing that necessity to color how you function as a person, especially when it comes to being in a leadership role, when you're hiring musicians and when you're engaging with other folks. Having a small budget, you're more likely to get the players that you want for less money if you've employed empathy, kindness, and respect in advance. If you choose your collaborators or the musicians you play with based on, being able to come together in harmony, have a harmonious bond. I think just when I've been hired as a vocalist or whatever, I might get a little bit less if I know I'm going to be playing with some of the most amazing musicians and there's great energy than over if I'm going to get paid a really great fee and everybody's psychotic. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You want to kind of create an environment that's harmonious. I mean, some people, they live for chaos. But I think that especially when I talk to my instrumentalist friends, people who make money solely as instrumentalists, it can be really sad when you're just chasing that dollar and then you find out that you can never kind of get to the next level you want to get to because you're still saying yes to people who don't respect you and who you don't create anything new or exciting with. And allowing people to tell you yes or no from that point on is very important, as opposed to trying to outstretch your resources, and try not to hire mercenaries because you're going to feel horrible afterwards. And just energetically, when I've done that, this one person that just had to have a certain fee, I ended up throwing off the alchemy of the entire project because I was extending myself above and beyond what I actually had available. And it made me pull my resources energetically from the other. So I wasn't able to lead properly because I was exhausted financially and emotionally by engaging someone that I was looking to elevate the work, when actually just having a crack team that can work together harmoniously is going to elevate the work, as opposed to trying to grab this particular person you think is going to bring some more shine or light to your project at the detriment to everyone else. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely it does. How do you know then, when you're hiring musicians to work with you on your projects, if the personality is going to be an issue like that, or if this person's just going to be a drain on you emotionally, spiritually?
You have to be honest with yourself. I mean, of course, I never assume, of course, I've heard things about people and then just went of my own volition, and it turned out fine. And sometimes it's a communication style issue, unless it's a substance abuse problem. You should always try to work with someone whose work you really love and whose playing you really love, and just be responsible for yourself. And then from that point, you know whether or not it works. But the only time I would say leave it alone is if it's like a hardcore substance abuse situation, because that can be dangerous. I've gone through that as well too. Really, with people showing up drunk or high I've had people steal my gig money. That happened once. I know it's so, New York is super punk rock. It was a punk rock situation. So that was crazy. And, and the way they did it was so, and I was like, oh my God, you totally ripped up my envelope and took my money out, but it was one of those things where it was like, if you didn't see them do it, what could you say? But I knew something was shifty and going on. And then I had to take responsibility because I knew that person wasn't well. Be like, as long as he plays good on the gig, I'm fine with it, because you might have that type of trouble. I also had that with an engineer where I had some feelings about it because, unfortunately, being a kid that grew up in New York, having a father who was a musician, he was fine, but I was around musicians from a young age. So I've seen musicians at all types of stages in their lives, and I can smell trouble in that way. And I asked my colleague who referred him, and she just thought he was really sleepy. But of course, that's not what was going on. So that was a problem too. So, and that's what I'm talking about, being responsible, having integrity, having some type of ethical foundation, because I'm thinking, well, as long as you can mix my record good, I don't really care. But what does that really mean? Because how can he really mix my record good if he's not, you know what I mean? It's like, it's hard. I think sometimes, especially when you're an independent artist, you have limited resources, you feel like it's all you can do. But at the end of the day, if you are an artist who has integrity and you believe in your work, you are not desperate. You might be low on resources, but you are not desperate. And desperate measures are for desperate people. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, you don't want to go there because it's a slippery slope. Having less resources than you would like is not the same as being desperate. If you have talent and you have principles and a dedication to your work, you are not desperate. You might have a low budget, but you're not desperate. And we should never engage with our work in a sense of desperation. I think that's important.
That's really interesting, because so many of us, I mean, we wish this was an industry that paid as well as, say, banking or investment, but it doesn't. And so we often feel like we have no resources. And yet you're saying, don't let yourself fall into that mindset trap. What have been some of the things you've done to conquer that so you don't feel desperate?
Having to evolve and mature and understand that maybe I can't have everything. Like I said, if my budget puts me in a situation where I have to do way more work than I have to offer in compensation, then I need to cut it down. Do you know what I mean? Or get more efficient, That means that I'm going to have to just rehearse longer for this gig because maybe I'm going to need to play bass too. And and I don't play bass often, but, things like that, where you take responsibility and accountability for the production value you want to create that that you don't have the budget for. So cutting down the size or having to become more proficient in another skill for yourself in the meantime. But that coupled with paying yourself will create an opportunity where you can get there eventually. And also, because this is definitely, I don't know where you're based, but on the East Coast, the culture in the music industry is very different than the West Coast. And I think it's because art in New York definitely is under attack. I can't maintain a rehearsal space in New York City. There was a building I used to rehearse out of in the 90s that's now a condo, and Blonde Redhead and Helmet were rehearsing there as well. A lot of the rehearsal studios, huge rehearsal and recording studios, spaces on 30th Street are now condos. The cost of living is increasingly going up. So basically, if you're maintaining a band in New York, you have to have budget to rehearse at a commercial rehearsal space. And it looks like the bigger ones, the apex predator ones like SIR, they're probably not going to go anywhere because they have all these huge label funded type artists that are there. But everything that the independent artists used to use, our resources are getting smaller and smaller. So, and how did I start this? What was all this to say?
About not feeling desperate.
So because of that, I feel like some of the East Coast vibration is not to always share your resources with each other. And I think that it's important. Of course, you don't want to put yourself at a deficit, but it's important to share resources because that type of reciprocity can allow you to have more options when the opportunity comes to you. But at the same time, be aware of what position you're in. And I think that something I've done in the past is sometimes try to lean on people who were in the same position as me, or maybe a little too adjacent, so they weren't able to share resources. And also, I think that I have attempted to share resources where I wasn't sufficiently secure. And so just understanding that balance, when it works, certainly not to be stingy because it helps, that circle of reciprocity, we can help each other out at different times, at different points. But then too, knowing when your footing is secure enough so that you can bring folks along without having a detriment to yourself. But it's a conversation you kind of need to have with yourself on a regular basis because there's a balance to it.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot, and I love your music. So thank you for putting it out in the world, and I'm looking forward to listening to even more of your stuff. This episode of The Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorico, the new professional music notation and composition software from Steinberg. Dorico has been designed from the ground up to be a flexible and powerful tool. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games. Compared to other scoring programs, Dorico is fast, fluid, and efficient. Designed for comfortable use on a laptop on the go, but seamlessly scaling up to working on multiple large displays in the studio. It has a beautiful, modern, and uncluttered user interface that allows you to focus on your music. Dorico also embraces the traditions of the finest printed music and produces pages of such balance and proportion by default, you'll be amazed. You can bring music into Dorico from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI. And you can try Dorico out completely free of charge for 30 days by downloading a trial version from dorico.com/TPC. Try it today and experience the future of scoring for yourself.